So we are talking today to John F. Kutcher, and you were actually known for coding Z64 games back in the 80s. For example, Space Taxi.
Yeah, that was my main game, Space Taxi.
So I wonder, how did you actually start coding games for the Commodore 64?
Let's see. Well, I got involved with the TRS-80 when I was in high school, and I think it was right after I graduated high school in 1983 that the Commodore around that time it came out, and it was much more geared to gaming, had color. TRS-80 was black and white and real big pixels. So got the Commodore 64 and started working on a game that summer.
I've read on the German entry of Wikipedia you actually got it because you thought it was the next big thing and you actually borrowed the money from your grandfather.
Yeah, my grandfather loaned me some money to actually buy that computer, and I was able to work that summer, on it. I eventually paid him back, but it was good to be able to get started like that.
So how was the reaction from the family? Did they think it was, I don't know, worth it or a waste of time? Because I remember for me as a child in the 80s and in the 90s, gaming was considered not something serious you would do to earn money or to code games. At least that was my impression when I grew up.
Yeah, my mom actually saw a newspaper article about some kids in a nearby town that had written a game. So she actually was the one that saw that and said, "Oh, you should go do this." So I went and met with them and saw what they had written, and then I said, "Oh, I gave me some ideas to do my own type of game," and I decided to try it out.
But actually, your first game wasn't Space Taxi. It was, I think it was Rescue Squad.
Right? Yeah, Rescue Squad. So I wrote Rescue Squad that summer before I went to college. It was really like three games in one. Uh, it was okay. It wasn't real great. Um, and then I got it published by Muse Software, and they added this guy Silas Warner who wrote Castle Wolfenstein. He added the music to it, and that helped to get a little bit of notoriety. But then I wrote Space Taxi when I was actually during intersession my freshman year at Hopkins.
And then, how did it actually happen that you did Space Taxi? If I'm not mistaken, it's one of the first games that actually used speech synthesis. Because the passengers would talk actually and, say, pad 1 please,
Right.
pad 2 please. And even in a different tone level every time, they would have the
Yeah.
impression that that you are actually delivering more than just one passenger.
Right. Yeah. So while I was undergraduate, I was an electrical engineer major.
Oh.
So I actually designed the electronics to record my to digitize my voice. So that's actually my voice, and the I actually used the expansion port on the Commodore 64 that usually is used to print. It was actually able to sample the analog to digital converter. So I had a microphone hooked to that, and then the Commodore 64 actually sent signals to that converter, and it would take samples of my voice and convert them between 0 and 255, which is 8-bit, and I recorded the sequence. And then it's actually the same recording played back at different speeds. So the different the different tones are just really talking a little faster, a little slower, but sounded like different voices.
That was actually quite pioneering back in that early 80s. I wonder, um, if you thought about, well, the result, how would people react to that? Because it was something very uncommon at that time. Because digital samples was mostly used later in later games like 87 Terrakin, or let's say 85 Impossible Mission from Epics. So you were one of the early adapters to that digital samples.
Yeah, I'm not sure what gave me the idea, but that was one of the unique aspects of the game. And the idea just came to me to build an engine. So I've always made programs very generic. So actually, each level, it's really one main engine. So I wrote it's fairly basic at the time, but it's all written in assembly language, and basically it was a big loop that emulated basic physics. So the taxi, there's each screen had a gravitational pull, but it could be in any direction based on the screen. And each one had a gravitational force and different thruster forces, and basically it just simulated the physics and moved objects around. But it's really the same. Each screen is really the same engine with just different sprites moving around, different backgrounds, different gravitational factors. So I was able to, once I built the engine, I was able to make new screens. I was actually making like a screen a day once I got the basic engine down.
And how you got the ideas for the level designs? I mean, there are some really, really interesting designs in those levels, you know? And you are even recreating some aspects of the real world. I think there's one level called the beach where you
Right.
have a big sun umbrella, and and a drink with a huge straw and so on. So that's
Yeah.
really a bit of like science fiction in a way.
Yeah, I can't really remember what gave me the ideas, but just an idea would pop into my head, and actually all the backgrounds are all written and drawn in character mode, the way the game was designed. So I created a font, and most of those backgrounds are built. It's really just one big font, and just could change the colors, from screen to screen and lay them out. So I had to think of creative ways to use the same shapes, each screen. But I would just come up with a background idea, and then an idea to have different things move around, like the ping pong ball or the snowflakes, or whatnot.
Did you borrow ideas from other games? For example, let's say Jumpman, maybe, which was created 1 year before you. Didn't really play any other games except arcade games, and you said Luna Lander influenced you. So you knew assembly before because you were studying informatic at the same time.
Yeah, I actually taught myself assembler when I was 14. Um, I got the TRS-80 when I was 13, and then I bought the Z80 assembly book and just taught myself how to do it. So everything I wrote back then was all in assembly. And then when I got the Commodore, then I had to learn a new instruction set.
So it
But yeah, it's
was
pretty
easy
much
for you.
self-taught.
Okay.
Yeah, self-taught on all that.
And I also read that your game you did after Space Taxi was actually Solo Flight, the second edition.
Yes, I worked on a project. It was an existing game. It was a flight simulator called Solo Flight, and I forget what computer it was on, but I ported it over to the Commodore 64. So that was my project to do that. So I added some new features to it, like being able to fly over water, I think mountains and things like that.
And
But
how
that
was that for you? Because you actually changed the publishing company from Muse software
It's
to company it was.
MicroProse.
Ah, right.
MicroProse. Yeah, well, Muse, there's actually a funny story. When I first wrote Rescue Squad, I literally opened up the phone book and looked up software publishers, which was in 1983. It's kind of funny that I even did that because there really wouldn't have been any, but there was actually one in Baltimore, which was near my hometown, and I called them up and I said, "Do you publish Commodore 64 games?" And they said no. And then I said, "Oh, okay. I just had one that I wanted to get published," and I was hanging up the phone, and it was almost hung up, and I heard them go, "Wait, wait, wait." And I brought the phone back, and they said, "We don't have any, but we're looking to get some." So I went in, and I showed them the game, and I was only, 17 years old then. And then I drove home, and by the time I got home, they told me to come back, and they wanted to give me a contract to publish the game. So that was a lot of luck there that I didn't just hang up a little quicker, and none of this would ever have happened. But then once I wrote the first game, then they said, "Well, why don't you write a second game?" And then it's hard to say what really inspired the creativity. But like I said, once I got going with Space Taxi, I just kept adding new levels, and added the voice, and actually wrote the game in a couple months' time while I was going to school.
You even won awards for Game
Yeah,
of the Year with Space Taxi and stuff.
it was nominated for Game of the Year, so it's sort of like the Academy Awards. Getting nominated is still pretty cool. Actually, the award I'm most proud of was the Consumer Electronics Show. The massive show each year. They gave out 10 software showcase awards back then, and Space Taxi was one of them. And I think it might have been the only game, or one or two games. So in the whole country, at that big show. So that's the one I'm most proud of. But it was kind of a neat. Muse had a really good public relations guy. His name was Jack Kammer, like Jackhammer, but it was Kammer. And he did a phenomenal job getting Space Taxi into magazines. I have about, I think, 20 magazines that Space Taxi was, all the major computer magazines at the time did nice articles on Space Taxi. So that was really neat.
So were you surprised, or was that clear for you that you would win an award and get nominated and stuff because it's such a cool game, or were you just clueless?
No, I thought once I wrote the game and then had started playing a few other games, I felt that it was as good as any game out there. I was like, it was just I wrote it just all by myself, so it wasn't like some of the other bigger companies back then, like Electronic Arts. They obviously had a lot more people and a lot better graphics and things like that. But but I thought it was a decent game, and I think the speech, like you said, was ahead of its time and actually pretty pioneering. So I thought it would it was worthy of being a top game at the time. Unfortunately, it was a really small publisher, and I think it probably could have done 10 times the sales if it was with a major publisher. But I enjoyed my time there, and then Muse eventually went bankrupt, actually.
Yes, I
So
read that too. Yeah.
yeah, so by the time I graduated college, so I was at Hopkins for 3 years undergrad, and when I graduated, within those couple years, they had gone bankrupt, and I remember going with one of my friends from school to the auction where they were auctioning everything off.
Oh gosh.
So,
Okay.
we'll get some good deals. It was ridiculous. It was used like broken desks. and used Commodore 64s, people were bidding more than you could buy a new one for.
Wow.
So we didn't buy anything, but then once that was over, a couple of the people that were at Muse went and moved over to work for MicroProse. So that's how I got. One summer I worked for MicroProse as a summer job, but I didn't write anything original for them. By that point, I was already working on some medical software, medical database software, which actually became my real job. And that's what I've been doing for the last 30 years.
It never has itched your fingers to make another game again?
Every now and again, I get the idea to do it, but it's just too busy now. Life's too busy. Got a lot of hobbies, and I've one of my boys really loves gaming. He's 14 now. His name's Joey, and he's incredible at Fortnite. My older boy goes to Hopkins. He's a computer science major.
You see?
And of course, they all play Fortnite, and they came back. He brought a couple friends back over Thanksgiving, and once they found that at the time, I think Joey had won something like 164 Fortnite games. He was legendary with them. So I tried to get him in writing some games. So we played. We wrote a little bit with this thing Scratch when he was really young. Like he was 8, but he never really. He likes playing it more than writing. So yes, I really haven't got into it too much.
Have you ever followed what happened after you left game composing? Game creating. I mean, for example, Commodore actually released an updated version of the Commodore 64, the Commodore 64C in 1986, and that fixed the bug in the SID chip that would make digital samples playable. Were you ever aware of that? Did you notice that? Did people tell you?
I think it was by the time the new computers came out. I was already busy at school and really really too busy to play around with the Commodore anymore. I remember the Amiga came out, I guess, and a couple people at school had that, but the whole Commodore 64 for me was just a blip. Maybe 2 years of time where I wrote my game and then did the summer job with MicroProse, but for the most part it was just about 2 years, a little hobby, and then mainly focused on school.
I see. So did you ever follow as an adult now, and as I said, you're working on other things, but did you follow what happened with the 64 afterwards? For example, the release of the DTV, the direct-to-TV version of the C64. And one of the first things that actually happened is people made a cracked version of Space Taxi to alter it so it can be played on this C64 joystick, so you could hear the samples, because it has a SID chip, an FPGA based, but without filters.
Mm-hmm.
Did you ever follow that?
I really didn't stay following anything once I wrote the game. By 1987, I was doing all PC development in C. By then, and that's what I developed in for many years after that. Wrote our own database and operating system. We actually invented a little thing we call data board. It was actually pretty similar to an iPad. We actually built the prototype. It had a touch screen. We wrote the operating system. It could do handwriting recognition. We just built that ourselves in the early 90s, but never really did anything with the hardware, because we're more software than hardware. But created a lot of technology from that wound up going into our medical database software. So it's not as exciting as games, but
yeah, but Well, I
Good
guess
look.
it pays better.
Well, I don't know. I'm sure you can make a lot of money in games too. But
Um, so now that you told me that Muse was a pretty small publisher, that explains why, while I've never seen Space Taxi, an original disc or something, on eBay ever. Never.
okay,
And
yeah,
the only times I saw it on eBay were people trying to rip off other people by saying it's public domain, or
uh-huh,
trying to sell copies of their game disc or whatever.
right. Yeah, I think the if I remember right, I'd say there were probably about 10,000 copies sold, maybe. So like a really good game at the time um, would sell maybe 100,000 or 50,000 back then. I mean, it's a lot different now. But like I said, I think with a bigger publisher, it probably would have sold a little bit more. But it was enough. I was able to pay my way through school. Paid a year and a half of school with Space Taxi, so that was good.
I wonder, as a coder in America, did you ever know or consider that games from America would run slower in Europe because of this PAL NTSC timing difference?
Huh? No, no. So what? The clock speed's a little different when it runs.
Yes, exactly. I mean, an European C64 has 9.98 megahertz, and the NTSC one has little over 1 megahertz, so it's like 20% kind of slower.
Huh?
So
Yeah.
that makes racing
Makes it
games, for
easier to play,
example.
probably. That's
Yeah.
probably why you're so. Germany's really good at Space Taxi out here.
Is it? Yeah?
Well, it's funny. I
Maybe.
was looking around the internet a couple years ago, and I was joking to some friends. I said, uh, I said, I'm like semi-famous in Germany because there was a game show and they did a whole half-hour special on Space Taxi, and I said, oh, I'm like David Hasselhoff. They like Space Taxi over there.
Is that surprising to you that after so many years, over 30 years since you coded those games, people still contact you and ask you about it? I mean, isn't your first interview. You did interviews before, but I guess mostly written interviews.
Right? Yeah, this is the first one. I think there was video, but yeah, a lot of them were phone interviews, and then they wrote up the answer. But yeah, it's always quite an honor when somebody contacts me about the game. I think it had a really nice fan base at the time, and it was. I think a game that kind of stuck with people because of its uniqueness and all the different levels and things like that. So, but yeah, I'm always deeply honored when somebody contacts me with that.
So, do you consider yourself one of those pioneers, or isn't it for you personally such a big thing?
I don't really consider myself a pioneer in the gaming because I didn't stick with it that long. I think the game was a little bit unique with the doing the digitized speech at the time. It's commonplace today, but so I think I was creative, but I wouldn't say I was a pioneer.
And how was it to work for on Solo Flight? Because it uses, if I'm not mistaken, vector graphics and so on. That must have been pretty hard to code compared to Space Taxi.
Yeah, I don't remember actually a whole lot about that project. The one thing I do remember is that the engine that Solarflake used was actually an interpreter of a language called SID-Trans. So Sid Meier was the developer of Solarflight, and he created his own kind of bytecode language. I'm not sure what it was really modeled after. So I basically wrote an engine that could read the SID, SID-Tran and then ported to the C64, and then I had to build the rendering engine. I think there were some libraries. I can't remember if I wrote them or if I had to write them or if I adapted some, to do the line drawing, and you had to try to do it. You had to be reasonably fast, so that was probably some of the challenge. I don't remember it a whole lot, to be honest. Working
No
on it,
problem.
yeah,
But it must have been a lot different back then to work on stuff because, nowadays you have video games that have, day one patches, but back in the days, if a game didn't work, nobody would buy it. So it has to work without major bugs. So you would
yeah. I mean,
probably have to play Space Taxi or Solo Flight all day long, 100 times, 1,000 times.
yeah. I mean, once the game went out, it was pretty much finished. There was never an update. I wrote it, we put it on a disc, and away it went. Yeah, it just there really weren't a whole lot of testers, at least at Muse. I don't remember MicroProse a whole lot, but the developer would pretty much test it. They might have had one or two people would play with it a little bit, but there wasn't a whole lot of quality control. But I guess the games, were um, usually written more or less by one person, so if they did a good job, they tended to be reasonably solid. And I guess any bug, what I guess would be a feature. Um, I can't really think of any bugs in Space Taxi that I'm aware of. Do you know of any?
No,
Any?
not me, not really. Not really.
Yeah.
I wonder, would you make something different if you were recoding the games? Would you, I don't know, do something else?
I mean, one idea I had at the time was I always wanted to do a version of Space Taxi from within the taxi, like a 3D, game. Um, that was one idea. And the other game I started on was I think I called it Backpack Jack. So I guess it was a little like Jumpman Joe, um, but where a guy thrusted around, and but he would come back and be able to walk and things like that. So I kind of worked on that a little bit, but I think I mainly just got focused on school and my main job, and just slowly got out of playing around with the games.
I see. So generally, you are happy with the result.
Yeah, it was something fun to do. It was fun as basically a kid, 17-year-old, 18-year-old, getting to work with the other developers, who are all adults, and having a real development job. Back then it was pretty rare. Our entire county, so big area of couple towns. There was only one computer in the entire county for school,
Wow.
and I was lucky. It happened to be in my math teacher happened to have it. So of all the high schools in the county, probably like 8 or 9 high schools at the time, there was only one computer of all those schools. So if that didn't happen, I probably wouldn't have gotten into it at the early age. So it was really novel to be exposed, to a computer and learn programming at that age. Now it's pretty common, everybody has a computer, but back then it was pretty rare.
But in the late, let's say in the last 8 years, 7 years, there's this retro hype happening where people are replaying C64 games again, NES games,
Yeah.
New companies are reproducing games or creating new games. I wonder what's your opinion about that? That nowadays the 80s are hip again and everything
Yeah.
around it is
Well,
cool.
I guess, but I'm still trying to figure out who it's cool to, because I I got an emulator, a couple, like maybe 6, 7 years ago on the PC, and I thought my kids would like to play Space Taxi, and they played it for about 30 seconds, and they're like, "This is boring." So it
Seriously? Oh my God.
didn't catch their attention at all. So I think the graphics are too primitive, and everything's too primitive for them to catch their interest. So I think it seems to resonate more with people who grew up with it than.
I mean, if you look at it, I mean, Disney with Wreck-It Ralph making a Donkey Kong-like game and making a video game out of it, and a movie, or for example, Pixels, who is concentrating on Pac-Man, you know.
Right.
So I don't know. It's really like the majority of people that were young in the 80s want to relive their youth in a way.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think one thing that probably the two things that were most unique about the game was the speech and the real accurate physics. So those two things I think were really unique at the time. But nowadays it's real. Everything has a elaborate physics engine, and speech is nothing. Everything talks. So it probably doesn't have that kind of novelty to stand out like it did back then. I think it stood out back then because it was really the only, one of the few games that brought those two elements together with some of the, quirky creativity with ping pong balls and the magnet and black hole and all that stuff.
I wonder, as you said, it would have been more successful with a bigger publishing company. Who owns the right to the game? Did the right go back to you, or did some lawyers catch it?
Yeah. Now, I guess I was always good at that stuff even when I was 17. So I always owned the game. So the copyright was always with me, and the publisher just had the publishing rights.
Huh.
So when they went bankrupt, basically the game was always mine, the copyright was always mine, still is. But then I had no obligation to publish through them. So then someone bought out the assets of the company, and I gave them a couple-year license to market Space Taxi, and I got a little bit of money for that. And then Twilight Games did a remake, which I thought was nicely done. So I still have all the source code for the game.
You have? Oh my
Yeah,
God.
yeah. So fortunately I got all the old floppy disks digitized when I was in college.
Wow. Okay, that's good.
I kept so I have all the source files to it. So I shared some of the parameters with them so they could replicate the gravity and physics of each screen. So I've licensed the rights to certain to use the name and use the some of the elements for different platforms from time to time. So anybody wants to make a version of Space Taxi, I'm always willing to authorize that.
I wonder, did you ever consider actually republishing the original game? I mean, nowadays we have Kickstarter, Indiegogo, crowdfunding is a big thing. People are willingly to, crowdfund.
Yeah.
That stuff.
Yeah, I'd be open. I don't have a lot of time running my company. So, somebody like yourself wants to, has an idea, I'll certainly support it. Lend my name and rights to it. I'd like it to have a future if people want to all kick in and publish something. But I don't personally have a desire to do it just because I'm so busy. But
I
happy
see.
to
But
partner with.
you would support companies who would approach you to do that.
Yeah, 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 as long as it's a fair deal.
And what's your thought, as I said earlier, about eBay sellers that are trying to make a buck on it, saying it's a public domain, and creating their own printed label and making customized disc. I mean, that's kind of cheap. Does
Yeah,
that
I'm
make
not
you
yeah.
angry, or what's your feeling about that?
Well, yeah, I didn't realize anybody was doing that, so it wouldn't make me angry. I'd just have a conversation with them, and figure out whether it's. I mean, I doubt anyone's making any serious money off it. So doesn't really bother me too much. I mean, if somebody's making a lot of money off it, then I would explain to them who owns the copyright.
Yeah, it's just when new people are coming into the picture, and there will always be somebody who's trying to make a buck on something, with somebody who has no idea, who has little idea about public domain, what's copyright, and so on, what are copies and what are originals. You would find a lot of game copies, and of course I know what I have to look at. I would say that's fake. That wasn't really not the way it was in the
Yeah,
stores when it was out for sale. But I guess
yeah.
that's always a problem there.
I actually still have some original packaging. I
You
think I
have?
have.
Oh my god!
Yeah, I think I actually have an unopened one that's still in a shrink wrap.
Wow!
Yeah, yeah. So I know I definitely have a couple of
Wow! You wouldn't by any chance sell one of the opened ones?
them. Yeah, I don't know if I'd sell it, but I'd take a picture of it. I don't have that many of them, so
You would
yeah, I don't think I
probably
would.
keep it for your own collection, I guess.
Yeah,
Wonderful, wonderful. That's
yeah. One
actually
thing I
good.
have hanging up in my work office, Muse made a big poster of all their games at the time, and Space Taxi was one of the main games on the poster. So that's a neat keepsake.
Great. So afterwards, you said you concentrated on medical software. So that
Yeah,
was where your focus was on because somebody suggested it to you, or it just happened to be?
yeah. When I was in high school, my math teacher um, recommended me to this guy named Dr. Sacco, and he had some projects to develop software to analyze injured patients who went to a trauma center. So he got me doing working on that in high school and throughout college. So I actually worked my way through college. Space Taxi got me through a year and a half, and then I worked for Dr. Sacco, and I paid for the other years. And basically, always stayed in that field, and in the mid '90s, I actually went um, uh, on my own for a couple of years, and then I wound up buying Dr. Sacco's company out when he retired, and then we became the nationwide leader in selling this trauma center software.
Wow.
So to this day, we're the largest provider of that. It's a niche type of software, but we've been the leaders in it now for 30 years, so keeps us busy.
And you are still doing that nowadays?
Yeah, so we've modernized it. When we first wrote it, it was all for the PC and DOS, and then made Windows versions, and then web versions, and now web service and cloud versions. So it keeps evolving and adapting, but
I wonder, is coding for you like riding a bicycle? Would you still be able to look at your old assembler code and understand it or modify it?
Yeah, I think yeah, it might take me an hour to get back, but I don't code anymore because I run the company. But my son is now a computer science major at Johns Hopkins, and when he didn't program before he went to school, so he was learning from scratch, as a freshman, and uh, every now and again he'd ask me for some advice, and
Oh, okay.
I would show him how I would do program and kind of go a lot more than you had to do to get the assignment done, but teach him some good design principles. So that's really helped him. He's he has a 3.9 at Hopkins now, so he's done really well. But I was surprised I was able to pick it up um, really really quick. So it's a little bit like riding a bike. You forget it, but it comes back quick for me. But
But I, but I guess.
I don't do it.
Huh?
I don't I don't develop now. I kind of fancy getting into writing a little bit in Python, which is something I'd like to start doing because a lot of our web services and server frameworks are written in Python. But right now I'm more the deal making and marketing and strategy. So I architect a lot of how things come together, and I work on the design. But actually writing code, no time to do it. But I think I could do it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
nice, great. So, but as I said, as I wanted to say, probably the way you coded like 33 years ago changed a lot. I guess you code a lot different than you did in your youth. I mean, more structure, different languages, more,
Yeah.
ahead
Yeah.
of thinking before you code.
Yeah. I mean, I have a unique style.
Unique
I've
style.
always had a unique style where I can just start coding and just keep adding to it, but get a good design that way. I kind of create a little bit of the structure, and I learned a lot at Hopkins from a couple really strong developers. Um, so I kind of learned some interesting techniques. You can write a lot of code just by starting with an infinite loop and just start adding to the algorithm and put in breaks and come up with ways to transform the code, and um, kind of a neat style. And actually, when I did a lot of C programming before C++ existed, and a lot of the techniques there were similar, where create, what would sort of become object oriented. You couldn't create objects, but trying to create private data members, things like that. So
I see.
some of the techniques, and I think the speed and the memory management, like our first medical program, we had to work in 64K of RAM or 640K, ridiculously small amounts of memory for everything had to be in that, the operating system and the program. So it's when you put it on a modern computer, it's incredibly fast. So I think a lot of the programs today, you can use frameworks and you can sort things and parse things, and with really quickly with real small amounts of code. But I think a lot of developers today don't ever really have to worry about speed and memory management and performance. So it's changed a lot in that regard. So a lot of the skills I had, they're kind of not needed for the most part, but they were useful in the day. I'm still kind of curious. When my son graduates, he'll work for the company and he'll start up his own team and maybe his own division. But I'm curious to really speed test some of the old C and C++ code I wrote against doing the same thing in Python, and see if there's a real speed difference. And if there is, then I won't, give up on the C++.
Well, there's a C compiler for the C64. You could start developing in C for the C64 again.
Yeah. Yeah.
But C is available for any system, really.
Yeah, that's
So,
why that's why I think it was a really smart business decision because we wrote engines and we wrote our own languages too. So a lot of our code is actually written in something I call Clisp, which is a combination of C and Lisp, and we wrote an interpreter for it, and we've been able to run that Clisp code on everything from DOS to Windows to servers, to even Flash and Action scripts. So we haven't had to rewrite our applications over the years. We're able to port a lot of that. So I think and my philosophy was always like C is always going to be around. It's like steel. You're going to build a skyscraper. Steel's not going to. Lots of new materials come and go, but C is always going to be there. Where other languages, we've had competitors that built their whole program in Visual Basic or built their whole application in FoxPro or whatever, Cold Fusion, whatever was vogue, but then it comes and goes, and C and C++ always there. Harder to write, but fast, rock solid. So I'm still a fan of it. I don't know if it makes as much business sense, but as an engineer, I like it.
great. Thanks a lot. So, do you have any future plans ahead?
At what?
I don't know. Personally, business-like, as I said, Python would be a language to learn.
Yeah, I mean, my main business idea now is to really, like our software is an engine to do data entry, data collection, and analytics. So we built a pretty cool reporting framework. It's a little bit like what Tableau or business objects might look like. So we built some cool technology, and then we built an engine so that we can describe a data entry form in a database, and it automatically handles all the user interface and all the database. So one idea I'd like to do is try to apply that engine to other industries than just the medical field. So when my son graduates and we'll expand the technology into new areas like that. So that's, it's not gaming, but that's, from an engineering standpoint, that interests me, and really trying to write programs that write programs is really what interests me, where you can almost describe the data that you want to collect and the reports that you want to get out, and it writes the whole application for you. So that's something that intrigues me, and I have a lot of ideas of how to do that. I wound up getting my doctorate in computer science, so a strong theoretical background in algorithms and computer science. So I have a lot of creative ideas that I'd like to see the next generation of coders implement. So I'd be the idea guy, and they can write the code.
Okay, see. You are making it up in your head.
Right.
Great.
So,
yeah, because you told me, you have to guide me through, but it was no serious issue.
Yeah. All right. Well, it's nice talking with you. Keep in touch.
Yeah. Bye bye.
Okay.